Our next reader is the author most recently of Folk Tales and Legends of the Middle West. A past Tuesday Funk reader and Gapers Block contributor, he has also written for the New York Times, the Washington Post, and the Chicago Reader, where he was a staff writer. He has lived in Rogers Park since 1997 and can often be found at Sol Cafe or the Lighthouse Tavern. He too has books for sale. Please give a warm welcome back to Ted McClelland.
Good night.
Pardon me? Yeah, I think so. So as you could tell from the introduction, my work draws from a bottomless well of Midwestern kitsch. And I'm going to talk here about how one book leads to another. In this book, How to Speak Midwestern, I have a description of the hodag. Hodag, a legendary creature with the head of a frog, the face of an elephant, sharp horns, and a spiked spine and tail. A hodag was allegedly captured in Rhinelander in 1893 by Eugene Shepard, a Northwoods P.T. Barnum who displayed his catch at county fairs for 10 cents a peep. It was actually a wooden carving with bull's horns wired to shake when viewers approached. Shepard's sons provided the audio by howling from a hidden room. The hodag ate only white bulldogs and could only be killed with lemons. Rhinelanders embraced the hoax, erecting a hodag statue outside the visitor center and naming the high school sports team the Hodags. The city's website insists that 90% of the golf balls lost in Rhinelander County are eaten by the hodag. Has anyone here ever been to Rhinelander? So you've seen the hodag statue?
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah. Okay. So in this book, I wrote an entire story about the hodag, and that's what I'm going to read right now. Rhinelander, the mayor told the civic boosters gathered in his office, is the boomingest little town in northern Wisconsin. We're right in the middle of one of the biggest stands of Norway and Jack Pine in the country. We've got half a dozen sawmills running day and night. We've got paper mills. The railroad and the river deliver millions of logs here every year, so we need to boost ourselves. Chicago had a World's Fair just 3 years ago. The least we can do is throw a county fair. I asked you fellas here because I'm looking for an attraction that will draw a crowd, not just from the county, but from all over the Midwest. Gideon Marshall, the sawmill owner, suggested building a half-mile clay track to race trotters. I know we can get Star Pointer up here, he said, mentioning the world record holder, but we can bring in horses from all over the state. Green Bay's starting a new semi-pro football team, suggested Adolf Kritzmacher, who oversaw one of the paper mills. We can get them up here to challenge our boys. Then Eugene Shepard spoke up. Shepard was a timber cruiser, an agent hired to inspect and buy woodland for investors looking to get rich in the logging business. He also speculated in land himself, which had made him one of the wealthiest men in Rhinelander. It did not follow, however, that he was one of the most respected. He was notorious for practical jokes, charging tourists a quarter to smell an exotic scented moss, which was ordinary moss he had scented with perfume, and devising an imitation muskellunge to leap out of a lake ballard, thus convincing summering fishermen it deserved the title, the greatest muskellunge fishing in the world. But it was precisely for this reputation as a mountebank that the publicity-seeking mayor had invited Shepard to plan the fair. Any town can put on a horse race or a football game, Shepard declared. We need an attraction that can only be found in Rhinelander. We need to capture a hodag and put it on display. The hodag, for those unfamiliar with Northwoods lumbering, was a sharp-fanged, sharp-clawed, scaly beast that emerged from the ashes of a cremated work ox. Oxen led hard lives in lumber camps, hauling back-breaking log skids under the goads of skinners who swore at them in French or Swedish or English or German. Driven to the limits of its strength, an ox seldom lived longer than 6 years. Even in a life so brief, it absorbed so much profanity that loggers believed its carcass had to smolder for 7 years to burn away all the curses. At the end of this period, when the pyre finally guttered out, there arose a hodag, a distillation oven or revenge for all the cruelty the ox had suffered in its working life. A primordial creature in miniature, the hodag was 7 feet long and fought off the world with sharp horns and a set of spikes that ran from neck to tail. The hodag was so fierce that it took a hunting party of lumberjacks an entire day to kill one. Their shotgun shells bounced off its hide, so they attacked their prey with dynamite, setting the hodag on fire. The flaming creature ran through the woods for 9 hours, burning down so many trees that the lumber camp had to relocate to Minnesota. There's no such thing as a hodag, protested Mr. Gritzmacher. "That's just a tall tale you heard from those lice-infested shanty boys in the camps." "There is indeed such a thing as a hodag," retorted Mr. Shepherd, who didn't mind being thought of as a charlatan, but hated being called a liar. "I saw one just last week. I was out inspecting a stand of pines north of town when I smelled something I can only describe as a combination of buzzard meat and skunk perfume. I looked down and sure enough, there was a hodag. As soon as he saw me, he ran off and hid behind a pine tree. I know where he is, and I can capture him and put him on display for 10 cents a peek. If you capture a hodag, I'll pay $100 to see it," Mr. Gritzmacher offered. With that pecuniary motivation in mind, Shepherd enlisted the aid of the Ancient Order of the Repeating Society, a group of local sportsmen who fought bears with their fists out of a sense of fair play. Since a hodag had never been captured alive, the society agreed to the challenge and helped Shepherd dig a pit 50 feet in diameter and 30 feet deep near the spot where he had seen the hodag. They covered it with poles and hid the poles under leaves and grass. "Here's my plan," Shepherd explained. "Now, as all of you know, hodags only eat white bulldogs, and only on Sundays. So I'm going to take the bulldog out to the woods, and when the hodag chases after it, he'll fall right into this pit." The only white bulldog in Rhinelander belonged to Mrs. Adelbert Weiss, a widow who would never have allowed her sole companion to be used as hodag bait. Fortunately, Mrs. Weiss was a weekly churchgoer, so at noon on Sunday, Shepherd and the Ancient Order of the Repeating Society lured the dog from its house with an ox stake, attached him to a leash, and spirited him into the woods, where Shepherd walked him around and around the pit. Just as he had expected, the hodag caught the scent of its favorite prey and came racing through the pines on its short but swift legs. He leaped toward the bulldog and crashed through the logs into the pit that had been prepared as its prison. In a newspaper article, Shepherd had once described the hodag as a terrible brute who assumes the strength of an ox, the ferocity of a bear, the cunning of a fox, and the sagacity of a Hindu snake. And it is truly the most feared animal the lumberman comes in contact with. So feared that once it was trapped in the pit, not even the bear fighters of the Ancient Order of the Repeating Society had the courage to chain it up and force it into the cage in which it would be displayed at the fair. The hodag ran around and around the margins of its prison, emitting a furious roar of a volume last heard on this continent when the woolly mammoth roamed here. The party agreed that only an unconscious hodag could be confined to a cage, and that only chloroform was powerful enough to disable such a vigorous creature. One of the reveaters was the town's doctor, and agreed to fetch a month's supply from his office. While he ran this errand, the hunters laid the logs back over the pit, so the hodag couldn't see his way to freedom. In the darkness, the beast went silent, and remained so until the doctor returned with a jar of chloroform under each arm. "This will be enough to knock out a dozen hodags," he boasted. When the logs were rolled away, the hodag was gone. Angrily, and against the advice of the reveaters, Shepherd clambered down into the pit to find out what had happened to his prize. At the bottom, he discovered a hodag-sized hole. With its long spiny claws, the hodag had tunneled his way to freedom. Shepherd, however, was not so easily defeated, especially when civic pride and a $100 reward were at stake. He ordered the reveaters to dig up a tree stump and load it onto the wagon he had hired to carry the hodag back to Rhinelander. With the help of an artistic friend, he spent the next 4 months chipping and carving that stump into a life-size replica of the hodag who had escaped from the pit. When the sculpture was finished, he covered it in an ox's hide and fitted it with bull's horns. Like his idol, the recently deceased Phineas Taylor Barnum, Shepherd was a master of deceiving the public for personal profit. On the day the fair opened, he set up his imitation hodag in a tent illuminated only by the sunlight that leaked through the seams, and hid it behind a velvet curtain. Outside the tent, he erected his hand-painted sign. "See the hodag, the fearsome Northwoods legend, captured and on display for the first time anywhere. 10 cents. When spectators paid their dime, they were allowed to peek through the curtain. Unbeknownst to anyone outside the Shepherd family, Eugene's sons Leighton and Claude had concealed themselves inside the tent. Whenever the curtain parted, they shook the hodag via a system of hidden wires, while growling and roaring in imitation of the cry their father had described for them. The hodag earned Shepherd hundreds of dollars in admission fees. It was such a hit in Rhinelander, he took it to the state fair in West Dallas. When fair season was over, Shepherd set up the hodag in his shed, advertising it as a local attraction at the railroad station. When visitors approached, he called to his sons, "Boys, make sure the hodag is tied up so he doesn't get loose." This was their signal to run to the shed, hide behind hay bales, and shake the hodag. The one man who wasn't fooled was Mr. Adolf Gritzmacher. As a businessman, Mr. Gritzmacher did not part lightly with $100. Before he would grant Shepard the reward money, he asked a zoologist from the State University to verify the hodag's authenticity. Fascinated by this possible discovery of a species unique to Wisconsin, the zoologist took a train up from Madison, paid a dime to enter Shepard's shed, and pronounced, "That's just a block of wood." We will never know whether Eugene Shepard actually captured a hodag or whether hodags ever existed. They certainly don't today. Andy W. Brown, a friend of Shepard's, invited a steam-driven log hauler, which he christened the hodag, in honor of the animal whose extinction it would cause. With machines to haul logs, oxen were no longer needed in the lumber camps, and once oxen were no longer burned after short lives of hard toil, hodags ceased to exist. Shepard was unembarrassed by his hoax's discovery. For years afterward, he displayed his wooden hodag for visitors to his resort on Ballard Lake. He also gathered his original hunting party for a photo with the hodag. Whether or not the hodag was real was not important to Shepard. What was important was that he had fulfilled the task the mayor had assigned him, drawing attention to Rhinelander. Today, perhaps only Loch Ness in Scotland is more closely identified with a creature whose existence has never been verified by science. A fiberglass statue of the hodag scowls outside the Chamber of Commerce. Rhinelander High School sports teams are nicknamed the Hodags. The Hodag Country Festival takes place every summer at a campground near the spot where Shepard captured his hodags. Hodags adorn Rhinelander police cars, while hodag books, bobbleheads, and t-shirts are for sale at gift shops and museums. Rhinelanders play softball at Hodag Park, finance their car purchases at Hodag Auto Loans, and get the oil in those cars changed at Hodag Express Lube. More than a century after its last sighting, the hodag is still alive in Rhinelander.